Life isn't perfect, and neither are we.
Nope. But we know how to face our fears
And have some fun.
and talk about all the messiest things of life.
Like the messiest things.
Get connected to yourself, get connected to others, and get connected to the life right in front of you.
This is The Connected Life with Justin and Abby.
That's me.
That's you.
And you.
Hey, Connected Life peeps, Justin here. You'll notice that you don't hear Abby chuckling in the background. That's because she's not here with me today. I have the opportunity to interview someone today that is an unbelievable guest. And I'm going to give you guys kind of like a 30,000 foot view of what happened and why we have this incredibly precious woman on today. But today we have a woman named Annika.
Hey.
And to give you a little quick background with Annika, I got one of the most amazing, sweetest emails. Annika is a listener of The Connected Life for a little while now, right?
Yeah, I feel like since the beginning, actually.
Yeah. And she began to share kind of her story. And her story is one of pain and redemption. And she's gone on a process of being within the foster community, foster care community. She was a child within it, and then she aged out of it. And she has a miraculous story that surrounds this. And when she reached out to me, she was like, I really want to highlight the foster community. Like, I really have a passion for this and for touching kids' lives. There's so much that kids go through inside of this space. And I want to see them be taken care of long after they walk out of they age out of the foster care community. And I was just so profoundly impacted. There's such a sweetness about you, Annika. And I was thinking, my goodness, like the story that you shared with me inside of that email, for you to be able to articulate yourself and to have the passion that you do, I was like, the world needs to hear from a voice like this. Because I think not only is your story inspiring about the goodness of God inside of the darkness of humanity sometimes that we see, but it's also inspiring in the ways of, I think, kind of setting a fire under people's butts to want to participate in other people's lives, because there's practical ways that we can profoundly impact people's lives on a very intimate level, especially with the foster care community, which I'm sure you'd agree, which is why you're here today.
Yes. Yeah.
So with that said, Annika, do you want to, I would love for you to just kind of get into your story. Is there any details about that I left out when we initially had that exchange?
No, not at all. I mean, I noticed that you didn't toot your own horn at all, but one of the biggest reasons why I did email The Connected Life was just wanting to thank Justin and Abby for everything that they share on the podcast. Has truly, as I've been doing healing work over these past few years, I mean, I just feel so touched and transformed by the stuff that they share and just how real they are, and how you guys have talked about topics that I've never, like the mother and father wound and all this abandonment and connection, just all these things that I don't hear people talk about on a regular basis. I feel like being a listener of your podcast has been the free counseling that I've needed. So truthfully, it's just been so transformative in my life. So really, that's why I wanted to write and just thank and honor you guys for that. It's been huge in my life.
Well, thank you for saying that. You didn't have to repeat that, but thank you for saying that, Annika. It's interesting because when we do the podcast, I mean, the dream is that it's actually healing people. And so when we do hear these stories, like someone that's gone through the foster system and some of the childhood experiences that you have had, and to know that it's something that's out there for free that people can just get a hold of, and to hear that it's actually doing its work in someone's life, that stuff makes me cry. I tear up and I'm like, oh, this is so cool. It's so worth it. All the time and energy that we spend, it's super worth it. So thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
Yeah. With that said, I want to we're going to dive into the deep end of the pool with your story and kind of explore that. Wherever you'd like to start, we're here to partake in it.
All right. I will try to give as much detail as possible without making it super long. So I was born into, my family of origin was my biological mom, biological dad, and a brother who is a year older than me, who is a biological brother. And that is the family unit I was born into, right outside of suburban Portland. and I lived with them. And I want to say a lot of people will ask, because I'm a survivor of childhood abuse, and people ask like, oh, when did it start? And I honestly can't totally remember. I just know that by the time I was in 6th or 7th grade, that it was something that was plaguing me, and was constant and drove me to, as like a 6th, 7th grader wanting to commit suicide, like having these thoughts all the time. I know that prior to that, I have very, very few childhood photos, like probably under 20. And I know there were some normal moments in my very early on childhood, but I can't really even remember them outside of photos. And so in middle school, I remember it was mostly physical. There was some sexual abuse that occurred. And when I was at school, I would completely portray myself as someone else. School became my escape as a kid. I loved school. I didn't like homework and stuff, but I loved being able to be with people who I could be whoever I wanted. So at school, I had friends. I was popular. Like, I was funny. I could put on this different face. I like lied about the family unit I had. I told everyone that like I was adopted. Like, I would just make up different stories every year.
Wow.
Thankfully, never caught on. People didn't catch on. But I mean, truly, I painted myself coming from a happy home. But of course, with conferences and like the typical, like bring your parent to class days, no one ever showed up. And so that was the only part that it became inconsistent. But with my friends and with my classmates, I was able to be whoever I wanted. And so that became an escape for me, which also led to survival for me being like a storyteller from the start, I guess.
Yeah.
And so it was a lot of the time it was fabricated. But for me, if I could spend, however many hours of my school day living a separate life, it was just how I was able to escape from what was really happening at home. And so I dreaded going home, so much so that I like joined like a after school recycling club, because I just thought,
it's so bad that I just joined a recycling club.
Literally, I was like, I'm sorry, I'm from the Northwest, but I'm not passionate about sorting garbage at a middle school. But I did that honestly just so that I knew this club was the club that ran the latest, and it didn't drop me off. It was also like the only school bus for that club that wouldn't come close to my home. So I had like almost like a 40-minute walk home, which was very far. But to me, I was like, thank God, more time than I can buy.
More and more distance. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, that was like 6th, 7th grade. Because of like the pain that was happening at home, I mean, it was constant physical abuse, definitely emotional abuse. I mean, I was always being told like I was supposed to basically, we wish you were never alive. We don't love you.
Wow.
Like, don't ever call us mom or dad. They would say, this is a hotel. Like, this is a hotel where you get food and you get a roof over your head and you get somewhere to sleep. But apart from that, like, we're not your parents. Like, this is just somewhere that you can sleep. And then one message that was constantly being said to me was, no one will ever love you. And if you ever can find people who would, then just leave right away. Like, leave whenever you have that option. And so, being like 11 when that started, and I just had this messaging in my head that was always, no one will ever love me. No one will ever want me. And like, there's no reason for me to be here. And then on top of that was like the physical abuse. And, to this day, I still don't know why I was treated the way I was. My older brother was not treated that way by any means, almost the complete opposite. Yes. And so we had very different experiences. And there were times that he also was an abuser of mine. And so it was really just like me being in this home. I had no concept of God. So I really called it, it's weird because as a kid, I would call it my hell home. And like, I didn't even know what heaven or hell really were, but I knew like hell is supposed to be in the human language, like the worst place that could ever exist. And so that's what I would say. Like, I didn't tell anyone around me what was going on, but to myself, I would say like, oh, dang it. Now I have to go back to my hell home. And so I remember thinking that like, as I was getting off the bus each day, a lot of people have asked, like, oh, how come you didn't tell anyone about abuse while you were in it? And that was never an option for me because my biological mom would, she would unleash on me for no reason, like beat me, do all these things to me. And then almost on a weekly basis, the next thing she would do, like as I was still recovering from being hurt, she would say, okay, let's get in my car. Let's go drive to the police station, or let's go drive to your school and tell them what I did. And so that sounds totally crazy, but truly it was it was a weapon of
Wait,
brainwash
so
because
she would say like, let's go tell them what I did, and then what
yeah,
you would be like, no, 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 I don't want to, or
exactly that. I would start crying. I mean, I was usually already crying, but I would like say, no, 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 like, no, I don't want to do that. But it was always, yeah, like, let's go to the police station.
wow.
Let's go to the jail. Let's go to your school. Like, I mean, and rationally, it sounds like so weird because you're like, why wouldn't you just say yes? But she knew that that was the reaction that would come from her saying that. And so truly, like, I knew it was not an option to do those things because as the victim of the abuse, I became more loyal to protecting them from being found out than anyone had ever shown me any type of loyalty.
Can I add that too? It's it's very interesting in those scenarios. I mean, that's pretty across the board. Children really will fight to protect their parents, even the worst case scenario parents, for multiple reasons. I mean, sometimes it's like, I don't want to be a bad daughter or son. I also don't know what I'll do. Like,
Yeah.
I won't have any place to go if I do this. Especially when a messaging is sent to you that like no one will ever want you, no one will ever love you, things like that. I gotta. Well, two things I have to ask before we keep going on in the story. One of the things I just want to say for everyone, I looked up Annika on Instagram. She'd shared her Instagram profile to say here's more to learn about me, and there's a picture of her as a little girl, and like I just cried over the thought of this little girl like having this type of response, because I'm like, this is the most precious little child. Like when I look at that picture, she is so adorable. She is like such a precious little gift. I like wanted to like pull her out of the picture, grab her and hold her and be like, it's okay. I got you, sweetie. We're going to leave this situation. You're so enjoyable. Like I couldn't imagine someone not wanting that little girl. And so that's just a side note, wrecked by that. One of the questions that I had for you, given that your brother seemingly was accepted, did you battle like with a lot of self-hatred as a woman, like with your femininity, like, oh, if I'd been born a boy, this would be different? Like, were there any accusational lies that blew through your head inside of that?
I actually, now that you phrase it like that, I do remember thinking that this like could seem like such a small detail, but I remember like my bio mom always saying like, oh, like wanting me to wear boys' clothes. I don't think it was totally like a gender thing necessarily, but I know it probably had a part to play in that. Yeah, I remember like them all having the favorite color blue, and from the start, I've always been very girly, but I definitely like put that away because I was like, oh, I need to have the favorite color blue too, then I'll fit in. And always trying to kind of like fit that mold. And I do remember thinking like, would this, because, I only had a brother, I didn't have a sister. And because he was treated so different, I do remember thinking like, does this have to do with the fact that like I'm a girl and they just hate me because I'm a girl? Or yeah, I guess part of me did always wonder that. And I remember being very like resentful about that because of just seeing how different he was treated. For sure.
Did you, how did you, because like you said, as a kid, we try to logic, like, why is this happening? What was some of the narratives that you played through your head as to the why? Because I think a lot of kids that grow up in abuse, like it's always going to be the question, like, why? And there's this thing that gets set up inside of kids that are in abuse, that they walk away believing that they're fatally flawed for, like they find all these specific flaws of like, this must have been the why.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I had dealt with major self-hatred because of what I was hearing, but even like the unsaid stuff. And so I remember like always trying to figure out why. I thought, oh, I've been told that I was like an accident and that they were upset that they had me. I had heard that from the moment I was born, like I was like cursed by someone in the family who said that I was a Satan child, like all this stuff. Like, wow. I mean, just like wild stuff that was said about me to me. And so I just remember it was like a nonstop, like wondering like, what is wrong with me? Like I had no room to make mistakes. I had no room to even just like be a normal kid. And so I became highly critical of like everything I did. And it really shaped how I thought about myself. I think that like self-hatred is what largely led to me. Yeah, largely led to like self-harm later in the future, and just like not ever finding any worth or even knowing how to accept worth from the few healthy adults, like some of my teachers and stuff. It's like I could never even accept that. I
It's
knew
so
I had
hard,
friends
right?
who
Like
cared.
love could
Oh,
be
for
all
sure.
present all around you. And you're like, I don't know. I can't let this land.
Yeah, because I'm like, no, I don't believe you.
Yeah. There's either an agenda. You're just saying it because you have to say it. It can't be genuine. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
When it came to going back into school, you're talking about the idea of almost lying a lot, right? Putting on this alternate personality. Did that feel incredibly exhausting, or did that?
I would say it definitely did when I realized like, oh, there are certain things that like weren't consistent, especially when I was like in middle school or high school. It's like, oh, I'm pretty sure that my friends are going to catch on that like what I'm saying about, like, I'm obviously at that point I wasn't adopted. And so it's like just certain things that I would try to kind of like make up or talk, write essays about, like, my family went on a family vacation this weekend. And it's like, that's not anything that ever would have happened. But it's like, it became exhausting because I had to keep track of everything I was saying.
Yeah.
But it also, in some ways, probably could have felt more exhausting, and in some ways, it probably didn't, because it really was how I dissociated. It's like
Totally.
I let my imagination run wild.
And that's that. A lot of kids that grow up in abusive spaces, they have a pretty profound imagination because they learn how to develop that space to go hide in. Like, even in the middle of abusive actions taking place, oftentimes we escape from our body and we go into a mental fantasy. Did you find that was similar for you, as going into the mental fantasy when there was pain being inflicted? Is that how you coped within the house, or how did you?
Yeah, for sure, was a lot of escaping into my mind. So much so that, like, I don't know, I think at some point when abuse is so repetitive, it's like you're almost preparing for it. I remember like bracing for it as a kid because it was so unknown. It wasn't like a certain time or whatever. And there was not a trigger. It would just happen. And so I remember just whenever I was in the home, it's like I was only confined to like staying in a certain room, always being watched. And it's like at that point, just escaping into my mind, daydreaming. I would always like picture like a beach. I remember that. Always picture I was somewhere else. And that started like really, really young, to where I wasn't truly like, I feel like there were times where I didn't even know physically what was like happening because I was just so gone in my mind.
Something that ran through my head as you're talking, sorry, this is going to be a little bit of a bunny trail, but one of the thoughts I had is I was like, I wonder what she's feeling right now as she's sharing this story. As you're sharing the story now or anytime, do you find yourself connected to it, or do you find yourself even in retelling it like, oh, I dissociate a lot from it when I retell it? How does that?
I think that I do feel a little, this is like, sometimes I feel like I'm telling, I mean, it was my story.
Yeah.
I don't feel all the emotions in the moment when I'm talking about it, but I think that's largely due to just like a lot of the work I've had to put in. So like with counseling or therapy, I've done like EMDR, stuff like that, that has helped me talk about it. And I think that like when I first started talking about sharing parts of my story, it's like just the smallest detail would cause me to feel like really paralyzed for a few days.
Wow.
And the more I've been doing it now, it's been less like that. But I think that a big reason why it feels more comfortable to talk about is because of the number of like former foster youth or foster parents who've said to me like, oh, I had a child in my home, or I listened to this and like for the first time I didn't feel alone. And so I'm like, okay, this is so worth me sharing, even at moments where it's hard, because I remember feeling like there's no one else in this world who will ever understand this. And on the other side now, realizing that like no one's ever alone in their story, it just gives me motivation to like keep on sharing about it, I guess.
That's very interesting. I thought, again, bunny trail back on it. Well, I'll say this. it is very easy for people to dissociate. And I think I like that you're sharing, like, hey, I've actually been on a lot of healing journey, and there's probably still places that I dissociate when I tell it, but there's a lot of healing that's taken place. And I think that that's something that's really a big food for thought right now, that no matter what circumstance, if you're listening, you've been through, there's actually a lot of hope for it. I remember that for me, coming out of my childhood, I just believed I was long-term a permanently broken little toy, right? And I was just like, there's something in my soul that's severed and snapped, and it's just never going to get repaired. And I know that, like, I'm sure there's waves of healing in your journey, Annika, and there's more to come. But I know that even in mine, there's so much that I'm like, oh, hurdles that I never thought could get repaired are actually repaired inside of my life. And I'm sure that where you're even at now, there's probably a lot of things that you didn't think could ever get repaired that you have gotten. Does that feel true to you?
For sure. Oh, so much that I have felt that way about, even from just like one huge example is like eye contact. I could not keep eye contact with people. And I remember being in job interviews and just talking to people and thinking to myself, like, I would consciously think, why can't you just keep eye contact with this person? Even people I felt safe with. And I remember being so disheartened, like, this is a huge detail that's going to affect relationships in all areas of my life. And I do not think that there's ever going to be a day where this isn't a struggle for me. And so the fact that now, after all these years, I think just through healing and through safe connection, that's been restored, it's still like a miracle to me, for sure. Like, I'm like, I never thought. And that's just one example out of so many.
That's really cool. I know that you were saying back before I kind of took it on that bunny trail, you're talking about self-harm for a second. What did that mean? Because I think I'm just curious when you say self-harm, and why did you self-harm? Because I think that there are a lot of young people that go into self-harm. What did you discover about, what you were doing? Was that often, and the why?
It was pretty often. It was just, moments where I felt deep emotional pain that I couldn't escape. And though I had like a lot of suicidal thoughts, I was too afraid to actually go through with it, I think. And so with self-harm, I remember, to me, in those moments, feeling like this is how I can feel pain. And it almost felt good. Back then, it felt like I was punishing myself. And because I had such a narrative of self-hatred, it was like, this is what you deserve. You need to feel this pain. And so I did it because of the times where I would just realize, oh, I've, begged to get out of this home and nothing has changed. Nothing about my circumstances are changing. And so the only thing that I control is what I do to myself. I can't control getting out of here.
Yeah. I remember a lot of the self-harm, there was a lot of, like, for me, I would hit myself, and whether that was in the head or the stomach or the leg or something, but I could feel, and for me, it was such an overwhelming sense of pain, and I didn't know where to put it. Like, I couldn't go hit the people in my environment that were being hurtful towards me. And then it's like, it's hard to aim hatred at parents at some level. It's like a mixed bag, but sometimes it's hard to aim it at them, and you're like, but they're the parent, so there must be really something wrong with me, and where am I going to put this? And so that intensity of that energy of anger, pain, sadness, all of it has to go somewhere. And it's like this release, especially if you've had violence against you, you don't know where else to put the violence. It's like this energy of violence hits you. You don't know where to channel it to. There's nothing really safe to do it. And then it rechannels right back into yourself, because you're like, I need to do something with it. And then right back in. Does that feel?
Oh, 100%. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. And I just think about so many kids in culture today, like that self-harm, like it's like, well, what's the alternative inside of it? How do I get this out? And that's something that I spent years actually purging the violence that was in my body, like having to actually speak to my body and release violence out of my body, because it's like stored trauma. It's not just the memory, but it feels like it's the energy of all the violent acts are within the body, and the body needs to get it out. And I remember the first time I actually reconnected to my body, because I was so dissociated from physical pain that I was like, oh, nothing really hurts. I'm not really that sick. I could be sick all the time. People are like, I think you're really sick. I think you're in a lot of pain. I'm like, no, I'm not. It's good. Like, I really got this. And the first time, and I think I've shared this before on the podcast, but the first time I allowed myself to reconnect to my body, it felt like I fell from like 30,000 feet in the air and slammed into my body, like reintegrated all of a sudden. And then I just start scream crying. And I started scream crying. It hurts so bad. Make it stop. It hurts so bad. And I was feeling the fullness of all of the physical pain from years that I inflicted and was inflicted on me in different ways. My question to you in relating with that is, have you gone on the process, and we're going to get more into your story, we're going to keep going with it, but have you gone on the process of reintegrating to your body, and what was that like for you?
I feel like maybe not consciously, or like I haven't like set out to do that before. I feel like it's like it has found me in ways, like unintentionally found me in ways. I feel like I relate to what you're saying, as in like I always was just like, oh, I was just born with a really high pain tolerance, like just certain things, like people around me, like I played sports and stuff and like was aggressive, and like I don't know, I just always am good at, like have been good at like dusting myself off, whatever.
Yeah.
And it's like I was always just like, oh, I'm tough, I'm resilient. And it was like, maybe for me, I felt like it was like a coping mechanism. Like I can convince myself into that.
Mm-hmm.
But as I have been walking through healing emotionally, like inner healing type stuff, and mentally, I have found that like the physical parts have come with it. And so, you know, like when I would feel like, when I have felt triggered, or I feel, like flooded emotionally, it's like for the first time, really listening to my body and being like, oh, my heart is racing. I feel like blah, blah, blah. It's like physical feelings. It's like, I'm finally acknowledging that there is a way that my body can be safe, and that I can listen to what it's doing, and how that actually goes along with like healing and all the other parts too.
Yeah, I find a lot of clients that come in, they're not even aware of like, oh, I have tension in my chest, in my back, in my neck. They're so disconnected from their body. They've learned how to be tough and stuff like that throughout their life, and have that high pain tolerance, as you're kind of talking about. And part of the healing repair process is getting connected enough to your body to be like, what is my body saying about my emotions, about my history, about stuff like that? What is really going on within it? And I find that some of the most profound healing takes place in that reintegration or that reconnection to the body. So with that said, going back to your story, so there was a lot of physical abuse. You're going to school and stuff, and for the most part, you feel like you have the world convinced that like, hey, we're good. I come from a rock star home, no problems whatsoever. Yeah. How long does that last, like through to?
Okay, so that keeps on going. Every day is truly just survival. I of course hoped that I would get out every single day, and it never happened. And so it came to the point of my mindset being like, okay, how am I going to survive another day? And that's a win if I didn't die, or even at times where I was very close to it.
Wow.
And that went on. I mean, I was truly in that repetitive abuse until I was in my beginning of my junior year of high school. And at that point, like I had gotten good grades and stayed a good student up until that point. And I remember just like my junior year, I mean, that's like the year before college, like you're preparing to finish well. And I remember going from like straight A's and B's to just I would wake up, I would have nothing within me that would have any motivation to do well at anything. Like I just stopped caring. And I don't know that it was that I stopped caring completely. I just had no capacity to care. Like I was exhausted. I think the abuse had gotten way more constant at that point because I was the only one at home. And so it was like, I was just everyone's punching bag every day,
literally people's punching bag.
Oh,
like you
yeah,
got
literally.
And
And for sure. And it was like, I was the one covering up. Emotionally, I was exhausted. I had like won like a few, like, cause I love doing like arts and creative stuff. I'd won like a few awards with like the school district, had like photos I've taken displayed like at the mall and like random stuff like
Wow.
that. And it's like no one was showing up to these things. And then I was like, when I would think, oh, maybe this will keep them from hitting me today because it's like an
Wow.
achievement. It's like I would say something and then it'd be like, you're a waste of life, or like, stop wasting your time. We don't care. And it was just like, it just added
Mm.
on like physical, emotional. It was all stacking. And it came to a point where I definitely was like, okay, I have not wanted to die because I have so many people I care about. Because I've had like people at my youth group and community that were very caring towards me, and I had built safe relationships like at the church that really
So
raised me. But
you eventually found yourself into a faith community outside
yeah,
the
and
home.
it was truly like not, it wasn't intentional. It was like I had one friend that I was allowed to hang out with, and in order to go to her house one day, like her mom was like, "Oh, we started going to church, so you have to go to youth group with her." And this friend of mine told me that we would just go to the church while her mom dropped us off, and we could go to McDonald's while her mom was gone.
Totally.
And so I was thinking, oh, cool, let's get a kids meal. And it was when we walked in that building to sign in, I actually like fell to my knees, started bawling. I felt like physical,
Wow.
like I thought someone was hugging me, and I had never experienced love at that point. So it wasn't something even familiar. That's how I knew. I'm like, okay, this is not something that's normal for me. Like
Mm.
I literally just kept telling her, I feel love. And she's like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, no, like I feel love right now. And so that's like the moment that was in seventh grade, like that I
People don't
encountered
understand. People
God.
don't understand that feeling when they've been in the presence of it in a nurturing environment enough. They don't, because they haven't had enough absence of it. And when you have had enough absence of love, you are profoundly hit by it when you step into the presence of
Oh,
God's love.
1,000%. And I knew I couldn't deny that it was God because I didn't believe in God, but I was like, oh, this is not anything I've ever felt in my life.
Mm.
And so that was like when I first experienced God. And then I wasn't allowed to go back to church though with this friend because my
Wow.
biological parents were like, you seem really happy after going to this place with her. You can't go anymore. And so I would like sneak and try to go to youth group sometimes, but it was not like on a consistent basis. But the environment of youth group, it was like leaders and young adults who truly felt like family to me. And sometimes they'd come see me at school. And so, yeah, by the time I was a junior, I just was like, I care about these people, but I know that nothing's changing for me. And tomorrow, like I remember being like, tomorrow is going to be the last day that I'm alive. Like I truly
Wow.
like had planned out my suicide, like wrote notes, like all this stuff. Like I was completely determined in my head. And so I went to bed one night saying to myself, if something miraculous doesn't happen tomorrow, I have to live as if it's my last day. Went to school the next day, called my youth pastor to come to school. And I just told her I just wanted to say hi because it'd been a while.
Wow.
She stopped by at my school, said hi to her, whatever. Went to class, all this stuff. But in my head the whole time, I'm thinking, oh, this is my last day in this class, my last time seeing this friend. So I feel like on the inside, I was a little more sentimental than usual. And then it came to my last class, which happened to be a social studies class. And my teacher got a phone call to the class and she said, you know, you're being called to the office. And so I went to the office. I was pretty sure, I was like, oh, this is probably about college stuff because we were in that process,
Right.
like getting ready.
And
And as
how
I
old were
walked,
you?
I was 16.
Okay.
Yeah, 16.
Okay.
And as I walked into the office at that point, my counselor, which I had only ever seen her about college stuff, she went and closed the door behind me. And I was like,
Wow.
oh, shoot, I don't think this is about college.
Am I in trouble? What is going on?
Yeah. And I wasn't like a bad student. So I was like, okay, this is weird. And that's when she told me, she was like, hey, so we've gotten multiple reports from community members and one of your teachers for suspicion of abuse.
Wow.
Do you feel safe talking to me about that? And in that moment, I froze because it was the most exciting moment of my life because I always dreamed of getting out. But it was also the most terrifying moment because I thought, if for some reason I disclose to her everything I've been hiding for all these years and I don't get out of my house, I'm going to get killed. Like I knew it. And so in that moment, I told her, oh, this is actually about my best friend. She's being abused. So like, can we talk about her stuff? Because my counselor had told me that she had the Department of Child Services on hold as I was in office. So she was like, basically, we're going to talk to them about this. And so I told her, this is not about me, even though it was. So we ended up talking to them. I told them everything that was happening to my friend. even though it was about me. I told them what was happening to me. I just didn't use my name. I said, oh, this is happening to my friend. And they said, okay, because you're not the person who's being victimized, you're reporting on behalf of them. Why don't you come back to school tomorrow and we're going to tell you what we can do for your friend?
Yeah,
and so,
she knows. She knows. She wasn't stupid.
Yeah,
she
I was like,
okay.
I think the counselor knew, but I'm glad she didn't say anything. So I went home. I remember walking home from school that day thinking, dang it, that really messed with my plans because I thought I was going to kill myself tonight. And so I was like, okay, I guess this counts as miraculous though, because when else has this ever happened? So I went home, and as I got home that night, a physical altercation happened where like my bio mom was on a couch. She like stood on the couch, called me over. And as I walked over, she like jumped off the couch and had me in headlock. And like, I started to black out. And this is,
wow,
I had never at this
insane.
point. Oh, it was terrifying. And I had never at that point ever tried to defend myself, but I was like truly starting to black out. I was like, if I die, it's not going to be at her hands. And so I swung her off of me, and she had something in her hand and it hit my eye. And I thought she had just punched, like, I thought it was a black eye. But as we got up, she was like, get the hell out of my house. And she chased me with the car, tried to run me over. And so I ran in someone's yard. And so
she must have gotten a call from CPS or something. Like,
it's the crazy thing is she actually, like, as far as I know, nothing had happened. It was like her just a common occurrence at the house, but it happened to be like the day that CPS had called my school. And so, I had to give her my phone and stuff. And as I was running, I ran to a grocery store to call the only number I knew, which was one of my youth leaders. And I ended up seeing somebody that I knew. And she was like, you're bleeding. And I didn't know that my eye was bleeding, but I guess I had a cut right under my eye. I had blood on my face. And I told her I lied and tried to say that I was just going for a jog. And she knew that I had lied. And so ended up calling my youth pastor. And that's the night. So the day I had planned to kill myself was the day I also miraculously got out of my home and was placed into foster care that night.
Wow. And so when you went into foster care, where did you go? How did that unfold?
So I was not supposed, so my youth pastor that we called, she ended up getting licensed while I lived with her so that I could stay with her and her husband and her boys. But truly, like, the state gave her permission to take me home that night, even though they weren't licensed as foster parents. But that's who I stayed with for the next 2 years.
Wow. And what was that like? Like, did your bio family try to come after you? Did they just leave you alone at this point? Just glad you were gone? Did the police ever deal with them? Like, what happened there?
Yeah, my bio mom was arrested and went to jail. I don't know for how long. She's not in jail anymore. It was not very long, but I know that she got arrested. And then they didn't ever try to connect with me in the way that they never pursued it. So even when we go to court, like in foster care, there's a lot of court hearings.
Yeah.
And they, instead of like going through a trial and like figuring out if they were getting their rights to me back, whatever, like that was not even a part of my equation. It was them basically saying like, we hurt her because we didn't want her. Please just take her. And so they had like relinquished their rights right away.
Oh my goodness, the pain, like the interesting relief and pain all at the same time. Like, okay, finally I'm out, and literally you don't even want to fight for me, which I knew you didn't, but you especially, I mean, like that would be such a mind mess.
Oh, absolutely. It was like terrifying. It was just such a mix of so many emotions. I remember even the scene of the crime when the cop came and told me like, you're safe now. I remember trying to run from the scene because it was just so scary to me to like imagine that I was somehow going to be safe somewhere else.
I bet a lot of kids feel that.
Mm-hmm. And the cop did tell me that. He said, like, your reaction right now is what we see with every child who's being removed from an abusive home.
Yeah. Because it's like, hey, the people that I was born with are terrible. You can't tell me that other people are better than them. Like,
and if they don't want me, who would?
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. No, it's a really big deal. What was it like? How do you feel like you showed up with your foster parents? Like,
I showed up as understandably, a very traumatized teenager. I did not know how to regulate. I did not know what healthy relationship looked like. I didn't
Yeah.
even know how to use a voice. And so I was of course, I was like very emotional. I was very sensitive, very guarded. And because of their humanity and like they didn't set out to be foster parents, so they hadn't done any trauma training. It was a mess in many of the ways because of just not the common understanding of trauma.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially if, you have a kid that comes in, because a lot of people, like you said, don't have any idea what trauma is, and kids act out, and you're like, man, this kid, I'm doing everything I can to help this kid, and they're being an asshole. And then you get angry. You don't know how to regulate yourself as an adult. Then you have the influence of maybe certain religious expectations of what a kid, how that you think they should behave, or you hold a certain standard where literally when you get a kid that has trauma, you have to wipe out pretty much every standard whatsoever. And you have to be like, this kid's going to be basically potentially nuts and violate every potential rule that we would hold for as a standard for a kid that does come from a loving space. And literally our only job is to figure out how to love them well as they just react consistently.
Yeah.
Did you feel like, it sounds like it's kind of like a mix. Obviously you guys are like two trains that smash into each other at high speeds or something as they're taking you in. Do you feel like you walked away with animosity towards them, or just like, because again, like they're human, they're messy like every other human, they're trying their best, but they're also going to fail, like we're saying here inside of this. Did you like, tell me a little bit more about that mixed bag for you emotionally? How do you process that?
Yeah, I feel I do feel lots of gratitude that I got to stay in a home with people I had already had connection with. I think that if I were to have gone to a home with strangers, it would have just added a whole nother level of trauma, of course. But I do, so I feel a lot of gratitude to this day. And then I think more than anything, I realize the importance it is for people who are signing up to parent or be a safe place for children or teenagers who come from a hard place to like really keep on doing the work to become trauma informed, because I have lived through seeing how just having a willing heart it takes more than just love. It takes more than just like a willingness to love. It takes like putting in the work to learn and to educate and stuff. And so I think that even at my age right now, I'm still processing and unraveling and unlearning a lot of the things that I was taught or not taught in that home, and seeing things for the first time as they are. Because back then I was basically comparing everything to my life before. So I'm like, well, at least I'm not being beat, and at least I'm not like, my standard was so low. The bar was set so low where there were some unhealthy things that I picked up, and it's like, or that I thought were normal. And now I'm realizing like, oh, this isn't stuff that serves me. This isn't stuff that's part of healthy living. And so it's like having to unravel that as an adult is not an easy thing for sure.
Isn't it interesting, like the progressive liberation that we when we are so deep entrenched in hell, there's just a progression from step to step. And there's like, sometimes people like in your shoes, even getting out of the home that you're in, some people would be like, well, you should just be grateful for it. And then other people would only pick out the bad things that happened. And it's like this idea of like, no, it was this progressive liberation going into spaces of freedom. And I have to live in the truth intention of like, here's the parts that were beautiful at this stage of the freedom, and the parts that were painful that I still have to deal with and unlearn inside of it. And it's hard because people need, either someone has to be the hero and someone has to be the villain. And instead of just like, hey, we're just all human, we're trying our best. And I'm sorry for the stuff that happened in that next phase. And I'm thankful that you had the step out. And the "and" word is such a powerful word. A lot of people, don't know how to use the "and" word. And holds to truths intention.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you were there you said for like 4 years or so? Is that what
I was in college for 4 of those. Well, okay, I was in their home, like living in foster care for a year in traditional foster care. And then when you turn 18, you age out of the system if family reunification or adoption hasn't occurred. So since neither of those happened with me, I aged out and they allowed me to still stay there in their home for a little bit. But I was a college student, so I was not like living there full time. And that's when I entered into extended foster care, where I remained for a three and a half more years. So I was in the foster care system for a total of 5 years.
Because the system is really trying their best to like say, hey, we want to keep equipping kids because basically, I mean, you're orphaned. That's what happens. Like, and not only that, but pre-orphaned, like, you know, for you, you're like, oh, I lived with my biological family till I was 16. But up until then, you were robbed of a lot of basic human understandings and stuff like that, how to relate, how to connect, how to be loved, how to be taken care of. They probably didn't invest in a lot of your learning and growing and development process, I would imagine.
Yeah. No, not at all.
So you're just kind of like, oh, I'm an orphan who's even though I'm with my bio family, I'm still like an orphan who's just trying to train myself to survive. And you just have kind of survival skills. And then so the system goes, hey, we want to actually take care of you and start helping you somehow make a transition into being adulthood. And I bet that felt very scary and overwhelming as part of it. Is that true?
Oh, 100%. Because I don't think anyone is ready to face like society, face the world alone when they're 18 by any means.
And now once you're in that, like there's, did your, when you, let me see how to put this. Once you phased out of the main foster care and then went into extended foster care, did you still have relationship with the foster family, or was that kind of severed at that point?
I definitely, they were still in my life and all that, because I went to church with them, and I still had a room at their house for like maybe a year or two before I was kicked out of their home.
Mm-hmm. When you say you were kicked out of that, it was just like it was just the back end of like, hey, we're frustrated, kicked out, or hey, it's time to transition out, we can't help you anymore? Or
I would say maybe a mix of both. I think because my foster dad, he kind of stopped talking to me about a year after living in their home. And so it caused a strain just in the whole dynamic. It wasn't, it wasn't like healthy family environment for me, because I'd been hurt by a lot of men. And then there's another one who, like, I still don't know to this day why he stopped talking to me. And so that had come between him and his wife. And so there was just one day where she was like, well, we wanted to let you keep having a room in our house till you graduated college, but like, this is just too much and we can't go on like this. So we need you to leave the home like in a month or whatever. Yeah,
man, it's crazy. And it feels so destabilizing. Like, okay, I don't know where to go now inside of this situation. And but you continue to get help within that extended foster system is what I hear you saying.
Yeah, I was able to live at a house that like my church had owned, with like other roommates and stuff like that. And there was other people in my church family that really stepped up and provided safe spaces for me to be in as I was healing.
When did you start, like, I know we're going to get into a big moment here, but when did you start the healing process?
Oh, I would say that I think I was like determined to want to start as soon as I was out of the home that was abusive. But I would say really putting in the work and consciously realizing everything that had happened to me, it wasn't until I had probably the year I was graduating college. So probably like at 21.
Okay.
Because I didn't start realizing everything that had affected me or how it had affected me until about that age, till I was in college and I was like about to be done and about to phase out. I was like, okay, I feel like there's a lot that I need to process and all that. Did
you just seek out like counselors, or how do you even go about doing that? I imagine there's not a bunch of resources for you, especially not having a family to support you.
Yeah, while I was in foster care, you're like assigned, like you have to go to counseling for a few months. And that was not a good experience for me when I was a teenager. And so when I was a young adult, somebody from my church like sponsored, I guess, like paid for me to go to counseling with
Wow.
a counselor who worked with young people. And that was very, very fruitful. And I think that, yeah, I mean, there wasn't like resources through the state necessarily at that point. I just was really grateful to have people in my corner who like knew like, okay, she needs help and there's no way that she can get it.
And I think that's a big deal. Like you said, there wasn't really resources from the state, because at the end of the day, that, you know, the government's role, I don't necessarily think should be, I'm not saying that it's not valuable, the role that they do play, but we as local communities, like that's the vital role. Like we as
Yeah.
people showing up, seeing the people in the world around us and being
Mhm.
proactive about like, how do I love that person? How do I take care of that person? Get involved in that person? How can I throw that person forward in some way, shape, or form? And that's where the real powerful relational impact happens. It's not just some state
Yes.
funded thing. Again, I'm not trying to minimize the gift that is as well, but there's a relational aspect when we start deliberately investing our hearts in one another without a demand.
Yes. Yes, for sure.
So so people started just supporting and paying for that, and you just started into a deeper different healing modality process kind of.
Yeah, I was in that for, I want to say maybe like half a year. And then it ended. And then it wasn't until probably right before the pandemic that I actually have started to be in like ongoing counseling.
Mhm.
There was like a few years ago, somebody paid for me to do EMDR.
Yeah.
And then my current counseling, I'm able to do through a nonprofit that they actually like match former foster youth
Wow.
with counselors who are willing to do it for free. So that's been a huge, huge blessing for sure.
And have you done, by chance, I'm just curious, because I'm interested, have you done specifically trauma-based counseling and complex PTSD and stuff like that?
I haven't, but I know that the more that I've seen about that, the more that I'm like, oh, this makes so much sense that like, I'm sure this is what I'm dealing with.
Mm-hmm. Well, in the middle of your this process, because this is kind of the crux of what's really unique about your story, is now well after you've phased out of the foster care system and you're kind of on your own journey without necessarily a family, but you have some church family, people who are loving you and being there for
Yeah.
you. What kind of what does that evolve into? What happens there?
So when I was 19, so I was at the church that my foster parents were at and all that. A new worship pastor came on staff at that church. And so because I was still living with the youth pastor and I was in foster care and all that, the staff did a lot of stuff together. And so this couple, you know, they were my worship pastors. I joined the worship team, started doing a lot more in life together. And just throughout the years, we just were really connected, did a lot of things, shared a lot of moments. And as things with my foster family started to kind of disintegrate, where, you know, they didn't adopt me and were still kind of claiming that I was their family, even though I wasn't being treated that way. I had to set a boundary and just say, you know, like, please don't use labels that are not true to what this looks like.
Right.
And so this couple was really there for me. And though they were friends with my foster parents, they also were able to see what was really going on. And they just had so much care and so much awareness of what was going on with me in my life. They stepped in and, you know, from the beginning, they were like, we are here to play whatever role you want us to play in your life.
Wow.
Like, whether it's like a big brother, big sister, like whatever, like we're here for you. And so, you know, they were there at my graduation. I actually even like lived with them for a few months where I had nowhere else to go. And like, they were just constantly there, invited me to holidays with family, all this stuff. They just became my people, my family. And so eventually we moved to Tacoma, for a job, and well, they were moving here for a job. And so I was like, I couldn't imagine my life without them in it, because they were really like the solid foundation of the first family I ever had. And so I came with them. And then, yeah, a few years later in 2019, the conversation came up where I was, as an adult, was still struggling with secure attachment. And I remember feeling like I know I belonged with them, but like legally and with my name, it's like all of that. It's like I still was struggling. Like I couldn't just take someone at their word. Somebody who says like, we'll be there for you. It's like I had such mistrust with that. And I'm like, I just need to know that I wish I just had people that I was tied to forever who would like, it would just be more than words, because that obviously didn't work out. And so remember the conversation came up, and my mom now at that time wasn't. She said, you know, like, we, if you want, like, we would adopt you. Like, and they were had said to me, like, from the beginning when they first met me, they're like, we would have been willing to adopt you then. Like, but we were just like, we know that you've walked through a lot of pain and a lot of relational just craziness. And so it's like they didn't want to be the ones to bring that forth, but they knew like the day that I brought it up that they would be like, yes, absolutely. And so in 2019, I was adopted at the age of 26.
Wow.
And it was at a courthouse here in Tacoma that formerly served as an orphanage for many years. And so I just thought
No
it was
kidding.
like, yeah, I like found that out after, but it's like I walked in that day, you know, I technically, I mean, I had really been orphaned for all those years of my life because I didn't have anyone to call mom or dad my whole life. And it's like I walked out a daughter for the first time.
What was that like? What did that feel like?
Oh my gosh. It's so weird. Not weird. It's like, it's crazy to even think about, even all these years later, because it's like something I never, ever would have thought would have happened. But it was also like the biggest desire of my heart. And I tried for so long, especially after I aged out of foster care. It's like, there's no way I would be adopted now. And I tried for so long to hide that desire, to like step it away, to get rid of that desire. And it obviously was, I mean, it was still in me so deeply. And so it's an incredible testimony of like God's heart and for what he thinks family looks like, you know? And to this day, it still blows my mind. Like the goodness that God was like, I care about you enough to say like, I have parents for you. And like, you truly don't ever outgrow the need for family.
No, never. It's so important. It's so important to have. I gotta imagine what was the room like, the courtroom like when that went through. I gotta imagine that even the judge would have been impacted by.
Yeah. Prior to this, the only court experiences I had were very traumatic. And so I remember being nervous that day just because it was like court was a place that was not full of good memories for me. But walking in that day, we had families and friends with us, which was beautiful. And then the judge actually got very emotional and just said like, thank you. He said, thank you for letting me end my week with you guys, because, you know, he just has seen day by day, he sees stories of family dysfunction and of this family distortion. And he's like, this is a happy day, maybe thanks to the system or what, but he was like, truly, like, this is a happy day.
Oh, that's so incredible. What has that done for you to have people that have chosen you? Like, it's not just, hey, we love you and we're here. It's like, no, we're stamping our name on your life because you're giving us the honor of allowing us to do that. What has that done to the way that you relate to people in the world?
I think it's done more than I ever could have imagined. With living so many years with inconsistency and so much change, it's like, for once, I have something that I know I can trust, not just in word and deed, but like also on paper. It's like, this is permanent. It's like a covenant. I know that I have their support day in and day out till for the rest of our lives. And it's like, it has just brought so much consistency, and really it's allowed me to learn to trust people. So them, of course, but then even those around me, it's like, I used to always, like, in the back of my mind, I never felt like I could be at peace because I was always wondering what else is going to change now. And it's like, now I have parents that are going to be my parents for the rest of my life. That's at least one factor in my life that I don't ever have to question. And they're just so intentional in my healing process and in this journey. They've just been so intentional in loving me back to life. And it's been just so full of like restoration and redemption to like reclaim things I never got to do as a kid. It's like getting to start new now and establish like new traditions and all that stuff.
Yo, that's interesting. You were saying like almost like a restoration of your childhood innocence, I hear you saying. And so does it feel like, oh, like you said, even traditions, like, oh, we're establishing traditions together. And do you feel like, oh, I let my walls down and let myself be a kid with them in healthy ways? Like,
yeah, 100%. I feel like it's like so many things that I remember being a kid and feeling robbed of or jealous of my friends. It's like, now I get to relive those things and I can look back one day and tell these stories.
Mm. I think it's so incredible how people, because like they're obviously have throughout their journey had their life interrupted by probably a lot of the messiness of your world. Like I'm sure you've had some big ups and downs, and they've been there for meltdowns and all kinds of stuff. But literally, it's not like you were just some charity case. Like their heart of love opened up. They see the beauty of who you are. You're a gift to them. You're adding something into their world. But like there's this entire impact for everyone that happens inside of that. And it begins to like go out far beyond just like them deciding to not be selfish. Like them making that decision impacts them for the better. It impacts you for the better. It impacts people outside of that space. I think it's so incredible. I think it's incredible that not only did they make the decision to choose you, but you made the decision to choose them and let them choose you, because that was a huge risk and that was really brave.
Yeah.
I want to ask a couple more questions. We don't have a lot more time left, but what was one of the scariest things about letting them love you?
Like you said, there definitely, is a lot of messiness that comes with trauma. And so in moments where I would be emotionally flooded or triggered, it's like I used to be a runner. Like I would just run away, run out the door, just run. And so I always think back to the moments where in the beginning, I used to just run because that was my natural instinct. And I remember one day it was like pouring down rain. I ran out of the house, was like standing on the corner of the street, didn't know what to do. I was just so emotionally flooded. And then eventually I walked back to the house and my dad was just like standing outside the door of the house, just waiting in the rain. And it really did make me think of the prodigal son though. But it's like, he was just standing there waiting for me. And when I came back, he's like, he embraced me. He gave me a hug and we went in and talked to my mom and we were all talking together and just kind of processing. But it's like, I remember thinking that day, surely they're going to change their heart towards me. Yeah. And then so many times after that, where I'm like, there's no way they can still love me the same. And they have loved me the same, probably even more. But it's like, that was so scary to be vulnerable and to let them see the pain in me. That has been so scary, but it's also been so healing because of how they've responded they haven't wavered in their love towards me after seeing me and my humanity like that.
If people were like, hearing this story, I'm like, wow, because I can imagine that people are listening and being like, that's so sad what she went through. I wouldn't want a kid to go through that. I wish that I could like help kids at different age levels. Like, what are like pieces of advice you'd give people that like were really serious about getting involved in fostering in some way, shape, or form, whether it's like young kids or it's just adult kids? Like, do you have thoughts that you'd give them?
Yeah, I for sure would say that if there is anyone listening who does feel that tug on their heart or if they feel something, to not ignore it and to truly like press into that, because it's not an accident that you're feeling this. And you could Google really just like foster care in your city or whatnot. But even outside of becoming a foster parent, if that's not something that someone can or would do right now, it's like you could become a court-appointed advocate, which is a volunteer position, which I currently do here, where you're like assigned to a kid in foster care and you like kind of work alongside them. Or if you know a foster family, you can like bring a meal, you could donate clothing to a foster closet. Like there's so many ways to make a difference in the system with like in any capacity. And I think that apart from that, like one of the biggest things that I would say is like just becoming trauma informed and being able to love the people around you well. But also like if you know a young adult who maybe they were in foster care, maybe they weren't, but they don't have a community, like adding an extra seat to your table, inviting the lonely over for holidays. Like those were some of the things that made the biggest difference in my life, was being included in things by different loving people around me. That
actually is so impactful. Like you said, like maybe someone hears a story like this and they're like, oh, I don't, that all overwhelms me. I couldn't like take on a kid. I don't know that I could commit. Like the idea of a chair, an extra chair at Christmas, at Thanksgiving, at a special moment, and being like, we want to bring you into our home. Come hang out with us. Let us give you a moment of normalcy,
Mm-hmm.
where you just get to feel like you're part of a normal family that has traditions and cares about each other, and we want to even just provide for you, because a lot of kids within those systems, they simply don't feel, and they're not provided for, it's not like they're not nurtured. Well, that's the word for it. And like literally making food for someone is a nurturing feeling.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you see a need and you're taking care of that need, and you're mindful of that in my story. And even the idea of like, oh, if they can volunteer, the idea that there might be someone even consistent as a volunteer through the foster system who's like, I've been assigned to your case, I'm going to keep walking with you in your case as much as they'll let me, as a consistent person that's around and a touch point. And just like, because there's such a lack of stability for kids that are in those spaces. And at the end of the day, like, I look at your story, obviously there's the miraculous hand of God inside of all of that. But there's a lot of kids that don't necessarily feel like they have such a miraculous story, and they make a lot of destructive decisions. I think not only the external events that happen to you, but the fact that you're not a crackhead, the fact that you're not drugged out of your mind, the fact that you haven't become a prostitute, you didn't get sex trafficked, that you didn't go down like a whole lot of other paths. Like, that's beautiful. That's amazing. That's incredible. That's miraculous. Even in that alone, the fact that you can have even a halfway intelligent, like if this was even halfway, this is a beautiful and very concise. You're very articulate. That's something I said to you. But even if you could get halfway there to articulate after all the pain and trauma, would be a miracle. And you've gone above and beyond that in being able to talk about your world and share space with me. I just, the whole point of that is to say that, like, there are kids out there, whether they're in the system now or they've aged out of the system, that are waiting for someone to be their miracle. Like, each little moment where someone chooses to love, you are actively becoming a tangible miracle to someone. It's like all the people that watched you from a distance and they saw your story and they're like, hey, come over here at the church. Hey, let me help you with this. Like, there's a million little miracles that they became to you along the way. It wasn't just one singular family, that a couple that chose you for adoption, but it was all these little nuggets along the way. Am I right?
Yeah, you're so right.
Yeah. And so I'm saying all this because I really want people to start thinking, like, I know that we're in a very busy world, and there's so many expectations from us to just like survive every day as it is. But when we have like a semblance of some excess energy or capacity, there are plenty of people waiting to be on the receiving end of that and to receive their miracle from you, which is showing up and loving them in whatever capacity that you can. Do you have any other final thoughts about this? Like, I know, like, ultimately I heard you say, hey, my heart is go out there, do it. Here's a bunch of different avenues of where you can. I had a major impact in my life because someone chose to just lay down their life and choose to love. And I now have a family that's walking this out with me, and I'm not alone in the world. Is there anything else, any other message that you want to get out there, Annika?
I think that, that's the biggest one, is like, we can all do something, and we can all play a part, and it doesn't have to look like becoming a foster parent. It can look like just living out of love and being intentional with our time and intentional with our homes, and just helping others know that they belong. Because I think that with me and so many of my friends who are former foster youth, that's like the number one thing that we desired, was to belong. And we all have the power to extend belonging to other people by inviting them into our worlds. And so I think that what a beautiful thing it would look like for everyone to just choose to be more intentional with helping others know that they have a place to be themselves.
I love that, because what you're saying is like, look, you don't have to have the tools to fix some kid who has a shattered background. You can just come with the gift of belonging, and that is going to make a lifelong impact. Just because I had a place to feel like I was chosen for a minute, for a season, for weeks, months, maybe years, maybe the rest of my life. But every time that a kid who's been in a space like that gets chosen, it it actually makes an impact, whether you see it or not in the moment.
Absolutely.
And I'll say this, to wrap it up. Annika and I were having a moment dialoguing about before getting on this. And I just started to say to her, I was like, sweetie, I'm so sorry, for what's happened in your life. And I just kind of reflected, I bet you felt a lot of these things. And one of the things that you said that was really interesting is like, I've never actually had anyone say, I'm sorry to you. And I've not really had anyone maybe reflect, my experience the way that you did. Is that true? Am I showing that right?
Yeah, it's so true, because I know that, it hasn't been the responsibility of anyone to apologize, because people, the people who really need to apologize probably won't ever. But the fact that you stood in the place of so many people who probably I have been waiting for apologies from or have never expected them, it still meant, it was so deeply profound hearing those words coming from you, who you don't owe me an apology at all. But it was like, wow, like I never thought I would hear those words. Like, I'm 29 now, and hearing someone say like, I'm sorry, for all of the men in your life who have hurt you, or who have failed you, or who haven't shown up, or like, I'm sorry that for the times that you felt like you're like a irreparable, like a broken toy, or just so many of the things you said. It's like, I never thought I would hear these things, but this has been, it's like I've been waiting my whole life to hear those types of things. And the conversation left me feeling so like deeply touched, because I was just like, wow, when somebody is able to like say sorry to you and to recognize those things, I think it made me feel so seen in like the deepest places of who I was. Like, oh wow, that is how I've been feeling, and I've never voiced that. But like, you saying sorry for those people in those spaces, it's like, it seriously brought so much healing.
The reason I thank you for being willing to share that, for those of you who are listening this as well, like you may get a moment with someone a kiddo that's in the system or out of the system, and they're an adult, and sometimes when they share their pain and their process, it can feel like awkward for us on the other end listening to something like that. Like, I don't know what to do. Your story sounds terrible. And I guess I can't fix any of that for you. And it can lead to a lot of anxiety, but it's a really simple thing. Like, when people have been through a lot of pain, it's so easy for us to just be fully present with ourselves, be present with the moment of their story, to see their humanity, to see the little kid that went through a lot of pain, and to empathize with the idea of like, oh, I can imagine that it'd be like this, and I am really sorry, and I am really sad that this happened. And the reason I'm saying this is that you, in very simple ways, as you're listening, like, you may not be equipped with all the tools that Justin and Abby are when you listen to the podcast, but you can step into someone's world, and you can actually reflect the reality of someone's humanity and their journey and their process that they've been in. You can acknowledge the pain that they've had, and you can even simply be there to say, hey, I'm sorry you've had this, and your story matters to me. And you're going to leave a lasting impression, especially on kids that have never, most kids within those systems have never had someone say, I see your story. I'm sorry for the story that you've had. It matters to me. And you can make a profound impact in those ways. And I think what Annika was really hoping for in this story, of choosing to share in this, is that there would be kids out there within the system that could have multiple levels of impact that they experience as people are maybe inspired to find different avenues. And really, if it's just, I told them I love them and they freaked out and they ran away on me, that's okay. Because they still have a moment in their heart that said, someone said, I love you. Someone said that I saw you. Someone took a moment to be compassionate towards my story. So don't despise those little things that you have the capacity to give away as you hear a story like this, because they can make long-term profound impacts.
Yeah.
With all that said, any final thing, Annika? I think.
Just thank you to anyone who's been listening. It seriously means so much, from someone who didn't have a voice for so long to be able to like use it now and to just share this space with everyone.
Yeah. Well, sweetie, I love you so much. I'm thankful for you being here. And I'm so thankful for the time I got to spend with you, even on the phone. It's been such a delight. And if you were impacted by this, rate, review, subscribe, and share. And thank you for giving us your time, everyone out there. And thank you, Annika, for showing up with me.
Thank you.
Bye now.